a good amount of information. Some more information has come out since the last time we streamed, and I've got my guy Suneil taking us all through it after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. I'm back with another show here, and I've got my guy Suneil here with me. We're talking some interesting football today. How you doing, my man?
Doing fantastic, man. And I always say covering this team is always exciting because even in the off season, there's always stuff to talk about, man. It's for real, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So yeah, a lot to talk about, man. So I'm excited to get to it with you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talk about how this part of the offseason, the dead part has now kind of departed. Now it's draft combine this week. After that, we talk about free agency, which starts, I believe, in 2 weeks on the 16th. Then free agency goes for about 2 weeks, and then after that, you've got the NFL draft that comes up at the end of April. Mock drafts will start coming out. All that kind of talk starts coming out, and so it's a bunch of interesting talk for sure.
Yeah, let's do it. And you said the dead part was that. It's like, where was the dead part? Like, I don't remember. Maybe there wasn't games, but there was constant conversation about, all that kind of stuff. So it hasn't really been dead, but I get what you mean.
Exactly. I mean, it hasn't been dealt with this team for sure. But let's get into it because John Lynch spoke a little bit yesterday, talked about the issues with the quarterback situation, obviously. Brock Purdy, Lynch revealed surgery was supposed to happen. He flew to Texas, and the doctor, I think it's Jason Meisner, had told him the inflammation was too much. Then he also talked about Trey Lance. What's kind of your take on what he said about this quarterback situation?
Yeah, so I mean, in all John Lynch press conferences, you got to kind of read between the lines because he's so good at his PR training, and he's very much so gonna talk for a long time without necessarily always saying something. So whenever I look for what to take away from his press conferences, it's wherever there are consistencies and wherever there are inconsistencies. I think that's where you could kind of read between the lines. And when it comes to Brock Purdy and his surgery, I think this is one of the cases where there were some inconsistencies because the confidence that they had, I think, right after the season, whether it was Lynch, whether it was Shanahan, the discussion was they were pretty confident that 6-month timeline was going to be it. And they weren't afraid to be like, it looks like everybody's saying 6 months and 6 months, 6 months. That number was really, drilled into our head. Mm-hmm. This press conference, though, Rohan, he was tempered as far as giving any kind of timeline. So to me, that makes me believe that there is some skepticism as far as if that timeline is going to be there. I don't think that the swelling is minor. I think that it is a bigger deal, whether or not they want to admit to it. And we mentioned it, and I was pretty adamant. I didn't think he was going to be ready for the beginning of the season, just because surgeries and rehabs and all this kind of stuff. There's always going to be something going on. So already, if you're postponing it, even by a week, you just laid out kind of what the trajectory of the next, everything's now is off season. We're going combine, free agency, draft, and that free agency is very interesting for the 49ers because the caliber of quarterback they're going to go after is going to be highly dependent on what Brock Purdy can and can't do. And to me, I think that we're leaning towards probably going after a decent backup quarterback because you don't know what you could expect from Brock Purdy.
Right. And I mean, when you hear what John Lynch said, he had acknowledged the surgery issues, and right now the timeline's unknown. But he also acknowledged the fact that Brock, in a way, earned the respect of his teammates. And when you were hearing about the conversation between the two quarterbacks, Purdy and Lance, it seemed like internally, Purdy is viewed right now as the as the higher option just because of the way he played when he had the opportunity. And I don't think I discredit that at all. I agree with that sentiment at the moment because one has played 8 games, the other has played 4 quarters or 5 quarters, however you want to view it. And on top of that, you know, Purdy played well. He took him to the NFC Championship game in his rookie season, and so I think that there is semblance about it. But I think it's intriguing because you've got a quarterback who you're backing, a guy who you're saying right now seems like your favorite, but he's not going to be there. The guy who is going to be there and likely starts week 1, which we'll get to in a minute, is the guy who you're saying you have confidence in, but needs to show durability and things like that. So I thought it was an interesting 2 sides of the situation. Another comment that I'll bring that I want to get your thoughts on. The Athletic Smack Barrows earlier this week, I believe, on a podcast talked about Brock Purdy, or I think he was on KMBR, and he talked about Brock Purdy, and he said how, yeah, I mean, the surgery, it's a little concerning, and now the timeline with 6 months, they don't know when he's going to be back, and at the moment, it seems almost certain that Trey Lance is going to be the week 1 starter, given the way that the 49ers have handled their quarterback situation thus far and what they've said about adding a veteran starter.
Well, one thing about 49ers and the quarterback situation is nothing is ever certain. So that's one thing, right? I don't think Kyle Shanahan would ever come out and guarantee anything this early into the offseason. So it's looking like Trey Lance is going to be the only viable option as of now that's on the roster. But before we talk about the Barrows article, Rohan, I wanted to piggyback off of something that you mentioned, because I think it's something that a narrative is being created, and it's the players and the team and kind of being behind Brock Purdy and not necessarily feeling that same sentiment about Trey Lance. And I think that that's accurate, but I also think that it's read too deep into. And why I mean that, Rohan, both of us have played team sports before. I'm sure, most of the people watching this have been involved in some kind of team event, if not team sports. And there's a different bond that's created on the field, in the games, in practice, all that kind of stuff. That's different from, even somebody who's on the team, but not really going through those battles with you. And I don't think that necessarily that means that the player that wasn't in the huddles or, on the court, on the field, whatever we're talking about, doesn't mean that the team doesn't believe in them, but there's a different bond that's created when you're week after week, you're going to battle with your teammates. And I think that it makes sense why players and teams kind of are talking more about Purdy, because he's the one that you could actually really talk about, right? How much can a player keep talking about potential of a player? At the end of the day, their mentality is next man up. So whomever is that person that's going to battle with them is the person that they're going to speak highly of. And so I think there's that narrative that's being created that, Purdy is the leader, and he should be the leader in the sense that he's the only quarterback that would be on the roster that has proven anything. Trey still hasn't, and Trey has that mentality that I need to earn this position. Nothing should be handed to me. But in my eyes, Rohan, if it's a 1v1 battle in training camp, both people are healthy, I believe Trey Lance is coming out of that battle as QB1. And I think that you'd hear a lot of the same sentiments and positive things about Trey Lance once this team starts winning with Trey Lance. I think that's the only thing that's missing, is these guys haven't been able to go consistently to battle with Trey. But I don't want to read too much into the team is backing Purdy, because I think that's the only person they really can back, because that's the only person they've really gone to battle with. You're on mute right now, Rohan.
There we go. What I'm saying is I definitely agree with that. I think that's a good way to put it. And so to me, I do agree. I don't have an issue with the way necessarily that the players have said what they've said. I agree in most part with what they've said as well. I find it interesting that you say in a competition you do believe Trey Lance would be the successor. I think that we saw right now last offseason Trey Lance entered the season as quarterback 1, ended up being the quarterback 1 going into the year. It's just funny how the loop is coming again, because Lance ended up being QB1 and he was sidelined, and now he wasn't viewed as QB1 anymore because of the injury to Brock Purdy, who was viewed as QB1. But now the injury to Purdy has now placed Lance back in the position he was initially in. the QB1 role. And I don't think the 49ers go out and sign a veteran quarterback that really, it's not that they won't compete, but I don't think they allocate enough money towards that position to where you can believe you have a frontline starter from whoever you sign in the backup pool. And so to me, I think that the 49ers are comfortable with their quarterback situation, but all signs right now point to Trey Lance being quarterback one. Obviously, the way that I've said it, and I don't know if I said it last week with you, but it was Trey. This is Brock Purdy's job to lose. Meaning, if he's healthy, he should likely be viewed as the top guy, although it'll be a competition in training camp. However, Trey Lance is going to get every chance to prove that he's the guy because he is now going to go into the offseason as the only guy with the reps of the two that are going to get a full offseason together with the new team and also a full, like, Kyle Shanahan is going to be able to create a playbook based on Lance's skills. I don't think it changes too much from the current playbook, although I do think that, the zone read system will be implemented because of how effective it was. It was extremely, extremely effective in the first 2 weeks of the year. How effective it was, I think that that'll be utilized even more just because of Lance's ability to tuck it. So I do think that there's a lot to talk about there, but yeah, I think Trey Lance, I do think that that's a possibility. However,
And
actually, you go first. You go first.
Well, what I was gonna say is I think that's what people are forgetting is this offense was looking. I mean, look, obviously week 1, Chicago in the monsoon, you can't really, that changed the whole trajectory of what was possible as far as game plan and all that kind of stuff. And any quarterback in the 49ers offense, week 1 always underperforms. Let's just say, put it nicely. But that week 2 offense against Seattle was moving with Trey. And if he didn't get injured, all of those plays that Jimmy came back to and looked great under would have been Trey plays. And I think Trey would have executed the same way, if not better. And that's just what the issue is. And look, I'm a big Trey guy, obviously, and I believe in him. But there is something to be said that, look, man, you got to be durable. You was nicked up year 1, where the finger and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, year 2, season-ending injury, and those things are. I don't know if you could really, that's just like a fluke injury. But Purdy was injured or at least nicked up as well, and each time he figured out a way to not miss a start, right? And I think that's one thing that is kind of separating. And obviously, I'm not trying to say necessarily Trey is injury prone, but there is a level of, at a certain point, we can't just keep saying you're not getting enough reps. At a certain point, you have to be available and you have to take those reps, and you have to, be smart about the situations that you're putting yourself into, because at the end of the day, the team is reliant on you to stay healthy and be there for this team to have any success. So I think a lot of the blame is being positioned on Kyle Shanahan, like, oh, he doesn't keep his quarterbacks healthy. And look, I think that's a valid debate. I don't necessarily think so, but I think that that's a valid debate with all the quarterbacks that have been injured for the 49ers. But there is a certain aspect to the player as well. Like, you gotta make sure to do whatever you can to stay healthy. And I think this year he's going to get every opportunity, like you said, but it's up to him to maximize that, because I don't know how many more opportunities he gets after this year.
Right. And I do think that that's fair. And when you talk about the opportunity, right, with Lance, the only way to get opportunity is to have the opportunity, right? I mean, that's the part of the issue. And I know we just both endorsed Trey Lance for this upcoming season, but I've got to shift it to a very intriguing topic, and that is the opposite of endorsing Trey Lance, because Aaron Rodgers, I have to say, I haven't talked about him at all with the 49ers this offseason, but Aaron Rodgers now is coming closer to his decision. And with Tom Brady out of the loop, with Brock Purdy's situation really unknown, could Aaron Rodgers be a possibility for the 49ers? And should they do it if Brock Purdy is assumed to not be ready for the regular season?
First, want to shout out my boy Lo the Truth. Haven't seen him in a minute. Thanks for jumping in, my guy. Here's my thing, Rohan. So let's first talk about logistically about Aaron Rodgers. This is a Hail Mary at the least, right? what it's going to take for the Green Bay Packers to trade Aaron Rodgers to the 49ers, if they'd even be willing to, you're going to have to overpay like crazy, right? And the 49ers don't have that much draft capital, high level draft capital, high picks to be able to give up, because obviously they made the trade for Trey. They traded away of all of them to get Trey, and then the CMC trade as well. But let's say somehow there is a package that they could get Aaron Rodgers. I would only bring in Aaron Rodgers if I believe Brock Purdy is my quarterback of the future. And why I say that is they're in a kind of interesting situation where Brock Purdy is going to be injured, right? And maybe he could take a year to rehab that elbow, right? You bring in a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who is going to be relatively cheap, right? 15 million, something like that, for whatever team trades for him this year. And instantly you become the favorite for the Super Bowl. This team with Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback is by far the favorite to win the Super Bowl. I would guarantee you they'd be number one in Vegas as far as their ability to win the Super Bowl. Why I think that could be fair is obviously Aaron Rodgers is closer to the end of his career than to the beginning of his career, right? And if he's already in the works of contemplating, retirement and stuff like that, maybe you get the best year out of Aaron Rodgers. It leads to a Super Bowl, kind of like how the Matt Stafford deal did for the Rams. And then Aaron Rodgers goes off into the wilderness, like I said, and, retires with, his second Super Bowl. Got to do it in, near his hometown and all that kind of stuff. And you have the heir apparent in Brock Purdy waiting in the background. So you don't miss that opportunity as far as losing out on a starting quarterback, because obviously the 49ers aren't going to be drafting high enough to get a young quarterback anytime soon, right? So to me, that would be the only situation that I'm looking at it. If you have belief in Trey Lance, which I think they do, I don't think you bring Aaron Rodgers in.
I think that that's fair. And right now, I mean, well, I'll answer the second part of my question, or first part. Should they do it? At the moment, it just doesn't seem like it's unrealistic for multiple possibilities. One, I don't think the Packers even look to trade Aaron Rodgers to San Francisco. I don't even know if they want to trade him within the NFC in general, but to San Francisco especially, I don't think they look to do so. And two, I don't think that the 49ers are looking at Aaron Rodgers in their current plans. When we've seen the quarterback situation and how contracts play, I've said it so many times, rookie contracts is where it is really. The last 6 Super Bowls, if you include Carson Wentz with the Eagles, there's been a team with one player on a rookie contract at quarterback, because it allows you for the most flexibility at other positions. And I think that that's very important. Rodgers, I also don't know exactly the fit. I think that this is a very interesting question, because he didn't like the LaFleur system as much. It seems like he likes running his own show, and I don't know how that fit. Now, about the possibility and what it would do for the 49ers. I mean, Rodgers is a bona fide good quarterback, and he would be the best quarterback that Kyle Shanahan's ever operated with in San Francisco by far. And I think that it definitely elevates the 49ers to a championship window, but it also limits their cap space, because he's going to cost a hell of a lot more than what Trey Lance and Brock Purdy combined are going to cost. So I think that there are a lot of these situations like that. And to me, that's why I don't know the realistic possibility behind it. I like your analysis, though. If they believe Brock Purdy is the future, then they do it. But at this point, I honestly don't know if they have enough data to even come to that conclusion, especially understanding that Brock Purdy will not be healthy likely for the beginning of the season. I don't understand if that's what, like, for that reason, I don't understand if they would make this move or not, because
Yeah.
right now you only
Sorry.
have one quarterback that might be healthy, and he's the one quarterback who you're turning your back on pretty much in this move.
Yeah. Like I said, Aaron Rodgers only mentioned one team that he's not going to go to, and that was the 49ers, right? So the chances of the 49ers getting
Exactly.
him are very, very slim. We're just talking like in a dream scenario right now. But
Hmm.
the other thing is why, it's probably a Hail Mary is the 49ers haven't shown necessarily the mentality to like go all in for 1 year, right? They're very much the type of front office and coaching staff that looks to make your team better, without jeopardizing future success as well. And Aaron Rodgers would not be that move. Aaron Rodgers would definitely be a move that we have to win the Super Bowl in the next 2 years kind of thing. And they haven't necessarily ever made that move, right? So it would be a complete philosophical change of mentality from what this team usually has done, which is intriguing because, Rohan, I think everybody's starting to feel that, hey, just the NFC Championship game isn't enough. I think the talk about Kyle Shanahan, the talk about is this team, the Andy Reid Eagles, or is this team, the Buffalo Bills that could never win the big game? Like, can't like all that talk, like obviously what changed Andy Reid from being just a great coach to now people thinking he's the best coach in the league, maybe top 5 of all time, is a MVP caliber quarterback. So maybe Kyle Shanahan is like, yo, give me an MVP caliber quarterback, and I'll show you what I'm capable of as well. And I think one thing about Rohan is, to me, what's interesting is how much did the CMC trade and the success of that trade influence Kyle Shanahan as far as high-level talent, what it does to his offense, right? I think that there's always been this narrative that Kyle Shanahan could get the best out of any player, so you don't necessarily need to give him high-level talent at the running back position, right? They finally did with CMC, and the difference in the offense was noticeable, right? I wonder if that changes what Kyle Shanahan wants as far as the level of talent. Maybe he's like, maybe if I do have better talent, that makes my offense look even better. I don't know. Well, that'd be interesting to see how he thinks about that now.
Yeah, I mean, they do have a lot of talented players, so it's interesting, but CMC definitely provides something different. And I mean, when you talk about it, I do agree. I think that there is a talk to be had, but there again, it's speculation here with Rodgers. One thing that isn't speculation, though, quarterback situation, going back to it, the backup. John Lynch said the 49ers will look to add somebody, be it in the draft or as a veteran. 49ers throwback here says, let's sign Marcus Mariota. He's one of the guys who hit the open market recently. What would be your thoughts to Marcus Mariota? Do you think it's realistic? Would you do it? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'd be amazing. Like obviously his skill set and his career in the NFL, I think would be great fit for Trey Lance as a backup because they can do a lot of the same things. And Marcus Mariota was a top pick that really had to learn. He was considered a bust, and then still was able to earn his way back into a starting position and still a viable player in this league. I think there's a lot of experience and wisdom there that Trey Lance could learn from because he's kind of on that same trajectory right now unless he balls out this year, right? So I think that could be helpful. But the second part of your question, is it realistic? That's where it becomes a little bit tricky because I do believe Marcus Mariota would be open to a backup position, but I don't think he'd be open to not being able to suit up, right? And that's where I think it becomes tricky for the 49ers and Brock Purdy, is because if Brock Purdy is back into the picture where we do, unless it's Tommy John, at some point in the year, you would expect him to come back and be able to be on this team. Well, you can't suit up 3 quarterbacks. So that would mean either Brock Purdy isn't suited up or whomever they bring in isn't suited up. And most people would think that Brock Purdy would be the guy that gets activated each week. So to me, that's the question, because now would a Marcus Mariota come to the 49ers knowing that he might end up the 3rd string, right? I don't know if he would be open to that. So I think that's what kind of limits it. I think a lot is going to be based off of, when Brock Purdy has his surgery and what kind of surgery it ends up being.
And the points you bring up are very interesting, right? Because Marcus Mariota he's a solid player for sure. And the 49ers, they had firsthand experience in seeing him. He would also fit well with Trey Lance as a backup because he has the ability to run with his legs and fit in this type of system. The thing about Marcus Mariota, though, is I don't know if it's realistic on either side. The 49ers, I don't know if they're going to shell out the money that Marcus Mariota might require, given that he's still relatively young and might be one of the top options as a backup on the market, given that he started this past year and has started in his career. Remember, after some down years, he got $8 million a year with the Raiders, and then he ended up being a starter with the Falcons this year. So I don't know exactly if he fits price range wise. And the other thing, the biggest point that you bring up and the most important is Marcus Mariota himself and quarterbacks themselves. When you come to San Francisco, you have to understand. Me and Jack Hammer talked about this last week. You have to understand that you're going to likely be QB3. You might not suit up on game days because guess what? Brock Purdy, when he comes back from the injury, the 49ers have faith in them. And if they're going for a backup level quarterback, that's with the understanding that Marcus Mariota or whoever it might be is going to be the third because Brock Purdy will come back and be the backup once he's healthy. And is Marcus Mariota willing to do that? Because it likely comes with cheaper money. I don't think so. And it's going to be very intriguing to see who they sign because I wonder, are any of the top level backup quarterbacks understanding they have a interest to start really? When you're a backup, you're looking to start still. You're looking to compete. Who has the interest to do that? That's going to be the big question. That's why I think Marcus Mariota likely is out of the cards based on realisticness for both sides. But he's certainly an intriguing player.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw that, and I know Jack's been kind of pressing that. I don't know how. I still think the 49ers could get a solid player, a solid backup, because it's not like there's a lot of teams that are looking for a backup quarterback to start, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of teams have their answer there, and like the Kansas City Chiefs isn't bringing somebody on thinking Mahomes is going to be injured. Eagles aren't thinking. There's a lot of teams that their QB situation is pretty set. So you're really only hoping kind of for injury if you're a backup to play. Not, I wouldn't say hoping, but that's the only way you're getting onto the field. So so backup and third string could be kind of the same thing if you're playing in Kansas City or you're playing for the Eagles and all that kind of stuff. You might get a game or two here and there, but for the most part, you're not going to really see the field. There's a lot of situations like that. And I think a lot of other teams are going more with young guys. So the backup quarterback is more of a mentorship type role. So I just think there's still an opportunity for these guys to come in. I mean, you look at a guy like Carson Wentz, he ended up being third string on his team this year, right? Or, guys like Tyler Heineke has been a third string, so I don't know. I think that might be a little overblown. I do understand the point. Like, obviously, it might not be the first choice for like the high end. I don't think Jacoby Brissett, Marcus Mariota, those type of guys that still feel like they probably could be a starter still young, probably can't get those level, but I still think we could get a high level backup quarterback here just because I don't think there's 32 teams that need a backup quarterback right now.
And I agree partially. Let me rephrase. And I say backup quarterback with the intention to start, I don't mean necessarily that they're coming in to compete, but I think their contract indicates that their team views them as a higher level backup quarterback. For example, Teddy Bridgewater was not going to eclipse Tua Tagovailoa this past year, but he got $10 million and a contract that it kind of said so. Tyrod Taylor was not going to eclipse Daniel Jones this year, but he got the money that necessarily said so. And it's kind of like that. But when you talk about the point, I do think that it is important because there are players that have to understand their roles. And that's why I think that you can still get it depends obviously what your level of high level backup quarterback is. But I do think that there are options. My number one would be Taylor Heineke, who has publicly said he understands his role and understands the level of what a backup quarterback could be. And so I think that he'd be my number one. I just think, though, that I don't necessarily overblown. I do think that the options would be more limited because of not only the 49ers' willingness to pay, but also the understanding of players coming in, knowing that they'll have a chance to compete in training camp, but not necessarily more than that.
But I thought on an earlier show that we did, you thought that because the 49ers don't have a lot of money towards their quarterback position right now, that they might be open to paying somebody $6 to $8 million a year to be the backup for the team.
And it depends, but I think that there's a willingness potentially, but I also don't. It depends on really Brock Purdy surgery. I thought that if he was going to have Tommy John, they'd have more of a willingness like that. Where if he was going to be out for the entirety of the year, but I also think that because of how the situation is, it really depends on how Brock Purdy's situation goes for what the quarterback situation will end up being.
Yeah, I mean, all valid. I just think that they're going to need a backup anyways, going into the season. And then, who knows? Who knows if they even want to bring Brock Purdy back mid-season? The 49ers aren't usually known to kind of make those type of changes. When it comes to, quarterback, they kind of go with whomever the hot hand is. So, you know, it's all up to, I think we'll get a lot more once the surgery finally happens, and we'll have a lot more understanding of what their options are.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. And yeah, I think that that's a good way to kind of continue on with the quarterback segment. Let's talk about some of the other things that John Lynch said in some quick hitter topics. So we can start with Drake Jackson. He said that we expect a lot from Drake in year two, talking about the strength level needing to kind of improve because of how it is at the NFL level. What do you expect from Jackson in year two? And do you think that he could be poised for a bigger role?
Well, I think to answer, is he poised for a bigger role? Absolutely, right? This is kind of how the 49ers tend to bring their rookies in, right? We saw it recently, right, with Aaron Banks. What was the talk about Aaron Banks? He needs to get stronger. He's getting pushed around at the NFL level. They kind of redshirted him a year, didn't get much playing time. Then he came in and nobody was talking about Laken Tomlinson anymore. They were like, well, we finally got our we got our left guard for the future. And, letting Laken Tomlinson walk was looking like a really great decision, right? I think that the 49ers are excellent at developing players, and Drake Jackson was a project. We knew that when they drafted him, right? He was a hybrid, and they needed him to become an every down kind of D lineman with this, coming out of the just rushing, and he didn't have enough moves. He was raw, but they saw a lot of upside with him. So I think they probably been working with him on his skills, obviously getting him in the weight room, getting him his body to where it needs to be. I more than, expect him to have a major role, not just because they invested a second round pick in him and he was, he's their draft pick, but also because the roster itself, like there's room for him to step up because they don't have that bona fide edge rusher alongside Nick Bosa. So it's his job kind of to win right now, or to lose, I would say, because he's probably the only guy on the roster right now to take that position.
I think that that's fair. And I mean, when you talk about Drake Jackson and the way that John Lynch said it, it's like there is some urgency because the 49ers understand right now they're in a situation where their draft picks need to start hitting, right? You don't have the requisite necessarily cap space to go and insulate every single position like throughout the next few years. You need to make sure your draft picks kind of hit. And John Lynch talked about how our internal candidates just need to get better. Drake Jackson has to take a big step. He talked about Kalia Davis and even Javon Kinlaw. And I mean, the good thing is Jackson's already working at the team facility, which is a good thing. But you do want Drake Jackson to get stronger. That's how he earns. I do believe in him. I think he's a very talented player. I mean, it was going to be a kind of a working year in year one because he's coming from a system in USC where he was shifting positions and shifting weights so much where you can understand that a rookie may tire out towards the end of the year. So I think that there's certainly things to be said about Drake Jackson. But it's true. 49ers need him to improve in year two, and we'll see how it goes.
And he needs to learn a couple more moves. Right now, he's just straight speed. He needs to, learn a swim move, learn a spin move. Like he needs to, learn that skill set. Lucky for him, the best in the league is on the roster, right? So he needs to be in Nick Bosa's back pocket and kind of just learn everything he can from Bosa. And it would be John Lynch's point is accurate, right? That's kind of what has kept the 49ers as competitive as they've been, is because of how much they hit on their draft picks, right? And I don't expect them to not be able to continue to do that. But Drake Jackson taking a big leap in year 2, I mean, would do wonders for this team, right? So yeah.
No, I agree. I agree on Drake Jackson. I mean, I think that the year 2 jump is going to be needed, and I think that you'll definitely see some improvements from Drake Jackson. Real quick, I realized that are in the chat. Obviously, we saw 49ers throwback, No Border Sports. I do want to thank you for tuning in, as well as Emiliano, and then Loaded the Truth 05. And then we've got the Real Team Me, Jason Agins, as well as
Steve-O
Steve-O Supremo.
Supremo.
That's the dog, man. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll get to your questions here, and then we'll be on our way. Starting off with 49 Emmanuel Mosley. Nick Bosa on Rich Sherman's podcast today talked about the defense, and he said how we've got a good amount of players. The linebackers, Fred Warner, Drake Greenlaw, Charvarius Ward. He even said E-Man will be back. Interesting, because earlier yesterday, John Lynch talked about Emmanuel Mosley and the cornerback position and raved about a guy who was on the roster last year and really broke out, which was Diamondo Lenore, and didn't necessarily commit to the 49ers re-signing Emmanuel Mosley, said it was, I believe his exact words was, it's far from done. But it seems like Nick Bosa has some back. What do you think about it? What do you think about Lynch's comments?
Yeah, I mean, players, I don't know how much players have say in personnel decisions for the 49ers. I think Nick Bosa wants Emmanuel Mosley back. Obviously, Emmanuel Mosley and Charvarius Ward, that lineup was extremely productive. They were turning into one of the better corner duos in the league before the injury. I would tend to go with what more John Lynch is saying, because I think the report came out. I don't know who it was from, Rohan. You probably know, but it was saying the market value for Emmanuel Mosley was something like $16.5 million a year or something like that.
That spot track stuff?
Yeah, something like that. So if they believe in Diamondo Lenore the way that they believe in him, there's no way they're paying $16.5 million for a guy that they feel like they might have the answer on the roster itself. So if that, it kind of depends on what where Emmanuel Mosley's head is at. Like, if he's able to go out there and get a deal that's like $16.5 million a year, and there's teams that are willing to give him that, I'm sure he walks, right, and goes and gets that money if that's what he wants. If there's some value for him to play with the 49ers, I think the 49ers would give him a deal, but it wouldn't be anywhere close to what he could probably get in the free market. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of depends on where he's at. I most likely would think that he'd probably walk, because he was an undrafted rookie. He's never gotten paid before, and this is his opportunity to get paid. So if it's out there, and like I said, there's multiple teams that know about him, right? Houston, the Titans, the Jets, Miami, they all know what he's capable of, because he's been on the roster when those guys have been there. So I would kind of lean towards him not coming back, just because I don't think the 49ers are willing to invest that much. The only thing that I might backtrack is that when he did talk about Emmanuel Mosley, and I'm talking about John Lynch, he said he could play outside and inside. So if they think they're going to move him to inside and then maybe bring back Emmanuel Mosley and have like a lineup of Ward, Mosley, and Lenore at the nickel or slot, maybe, but I don't know. Doesn't seem likely.
To me, I think it's interesting, because I think that this is going to be one of the most talked about ones throughout like the next few weeks until free agency. I had Emmanuel Mosley as my number one free agent to bring back over Mike McGlinchey. I think the value he brings, the value that he will likely cost given his ACL injury, is huge, and I think he should get some competition. Houston obviously is a very clear one, because to be a cornerback one for that team pretty much going into his prime, I think is huge. But Emmanuel Mosley, I mean, Nick Bosa's comments do give me confidence, but Emmanuel Mosley, he's a guy who has been very good for the 49ers. I think
Yeah.
if you have a chance to bring him back at a reasonable price, you don't let that talent walk. I understand Diamond Lenore's there, but I also think it puts Diamond Lenore in a good place because he can play in the slot. And what a good talent about Diamond Lenore is his size, which allows him to play in the run. And playing the run fits are really important for the 49ers as a nickel corner. I think Diamond Lenore fits that very well. And there's a reason that they wanted him in there over Samuel Womack after week 2 or something, when Womack was the guy. They flipped to Lenore, and then obviously Lenore had to kick out. So I do think that there's a value in having Lenore there. And I like the younger players. I do want the younger players to get time, but you also have to capitalize on your window. Mosley at a younger age, coming off an ACL injury, shouldn't be too expensive. I think the 49ers can get him on a 2-year deal or even a 1-year prove-it deal, have him hit free agency, and then get a big contract again. I don't think he necessarily signs a massive extension with the 49ers, one of those 3-year, $42 million deals like Ward. Do I think he's worth it? Yeah, I honestly think I wouldn't mind if he got that from another team prior to the injury. So I do think he's worth it, but I think he could sign a prove-it deal worth $8 to $10 million. I would not mind that, and the 49ers have really, really strong secondary next year.
Yeah, it's just if he would take that, because if he's
Very true.
getting, yeah, I think that he is going to find a team that's willing to give him a 3-year, something like 30, 35 million type deal or something like that, just because of how important cornerbacks are in the league, especially with how good wide receivers are. So yeah, I don't think he's going to be a bargain player for the 49ers. I'm with you though. This team is better with him than without him. I just think that $8 million, $10 million deal, I don't know if that gets it done. I think maybe a guy like Greedy Williams might come to the 49ers on that type of deal. I think Emmanuel Mosley realizes I think he wants to get paid.
No, I agree. But Suneil, it's been a hell of a show, man. We have decided we're going to split up this week into 2 different shows because there's a lot to talk about. So if you guys have loved what you've heard today, be sure to check out us later in the week. It'll either be closer to the weekend, of course, but we've got things like Mike McGlinchey to talk about after what John Lynch said. We've got things like some other topics from comments he said, as well as the incoming news from the draft combine. So we are going to have another show later this week. But those of you guys that drop your questions, continue to add in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Any final thoughts, Neil?
No, man, I love that the chat is active. Obviously, a lot of questions there. We'll make sure to write those down and give us topics for our show later on this week. So keep tapped in.
100%. Guys, thank you so much. We will be back with another show. Suneil, you want to take us out of here?
Like I always say, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll talk again very, very soon.
See you guys.